our study of the apostles and talk about Philip. And I guess the first thing we should say about Philip is that this is not the Philip you read about in Acts chapter 8. Some of these names are really common. Philip's one of those. Philip in Acts chapter 8 is a later Philip. He's a deacon, one of the first deacons of the church, also a very successful evangelist. You see him going through Samaria and also talking with the Ethiopian eunuch. That's a different Philip. This one is one of the handpicked 12 apostles of Jesus Christ. And the name that we're giving him is the first found by Jesus. And I'll explain why he gets that name in just a moment. If you'll recall the chart that we put up in the first class that put together all of the lists from Matthew, Mark, Luke, and Acts, the apostles were grouped in 3 groups of 4. And we're now out of the first group. Matthew, Mark, I'm sorry, that's the gospel names. I'll get it in a minute. Peter, Andrew, James, and John. We've done the first group of 4. And you'll recall that these groups are spaced or listed according to their intimacy with Christ. So that inner circle, all 3 that belong in the inner circle, Peter, James, and John, are in that first group of 4. And we're out of that group now, and we're getting into some of the lesser-known apostles. Of course, near the end of the quarter, we'll talk about Paul, and we know a whole lot about Paul. This is going to get interesting, though, as we get into people like Philip, that we have less biographical information about. You might find that we have more than you might have thought before you came to class tonight. I hope that's the case. Hopefully, you'll learn something. But something interesting about Philip in that second group of 4 is he is always listed as the first among those. And that says something. I mean, if it said something about Peter, that he was always listed first of the 12 and first of the first group of 4, it says something about Philip that he's always listed first of the second group of 4. He must have been second-tier leader of some kind, of some importance or influence with the people in that group. And so we're now breaking into that second group. The specifics of his life are only recorded by John. I think that's really interesting. John's the only author who doesn't give us a list of the apostles. All of those are found in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and Acts. We get to John, no list. John probably thought, well, you can read Matthew, Mark, and Luke. He wrote his gospel account much later. He had some more detailed information to share with us about certain disciples like Philip, like, as you'll see next week, Nathaniel, like, thankfully, Thomas. I'm going to love talking about Thomas. John tells us about these men, whereas the others only list them in these lists that we've been talking about. And so we're going to enjoy looking at him through the eyes of John. And I'm just breaking this down into 3 parts tonight. We'll talk about Philip's friends, Philip's Savior, and then some of Philip's shortcomings. And I think this will give you a good look at a character of the New Testament we rarely study. Let's talk about Philip's friends. Charles Kingsley was once asked, "What is the secret of your life? Tell me that I may make mine beautiful too." And Kingsley very modestly said, "I had a friend." And I think that's just wonderful because a lot of us start into a beautiful life simply because of somebody that we happen to meet, a friend or a group of friends. I think if you've got one good friend in your life, you're a lucky person. We often look at others and think, oh, you know, they have so many friends, they're so popular, but really it's very rare to just have one good friend. Somebody said in a lecture, I've been to so many lectures and speeches and things lately, I can't remember who said what, but I remember somebody saying the most we can keep up with intimately, closely, is 5 close friends. I thought that was a really interesting thing because Most of us think of ourselves as having a lot more than 5 friends. But start going down the list. Don't name them out loud, and especially where your neighbor can hear you. But start going down in your mind a list of who's really close to you, let's say outside your family. Those close friends, it's maybe hard to come up with 5. And if you have more than 5, you're a really busy person. Your social schedule would stress me out because you would have to work really hard at nurturing those relationships. Philip got started because he had some really good friends. Turn over in your Bible to John chapter 1. This is where we're introduced to a lot of apostles, if you haven't noticed already. John chapter 1. And we're first introduced to Philip in verse 44. Now, Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter. This is the only time Andrew is mentioned before his brother Peter, which may mean that early on, Andrew, maybe he was the oldest, or he was a leader when it came to fishing, but they switched, and it was Peter and Andrew from that point forward. But we're interested in Philip, and it was significant enough for John to mention that all 3 of these guys hailed from the same hometown, from Bethsaida. Bethsaida was in Galilee, and it was another one of those fishing villages, not far from Nazareth, not far from Capernaum and some of the other places we read a lot about in the New Testament. Bethsaida was rebuked by Jesus in Matthew chapter 11, and I think it's important to go over and read that. And so I'm going to go over there where Jesus began to denounce the cities where most of his mighty works had been done because they did not repent. Listen to what he says, Matthew 11, verse 21. Woe to you, Chorazin! Woe to you, Bethsaida! That's the hometown of Peter, Andrew, and Philip. If the mighty works done in you had been done in Tyre and Sidon, they would have repented long ago in sackcloth and ashes. Tyre and Sidon were 2 heathen villages on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea, just on the western edge of Palestine. And in the Old Testament, you see them engaging in idolatrous practices and drawing the wrath of God. And Jesus is saying, if I had visited those villages, they would have responded to me much more warmly than Bethsaida. So that's a sad commentary on Bethsaida, but John makes up for it a little bit by telling us it was the hometown of Peter, Andrew, and Philip. Philip probably grew up attending the same synagogue as Peter and Andrew. They were close before Jesus. And there may have been more disciples involved in this little group. There were a lot of fishermen. I don't know if you've noticed. A lot of fishermen. Peter, Andrew, James, and John. James and John were a part of this big fishing business of Zebedee. And I find it interesting when you go over to John 21, after all the events of Jesus' life have happened, Peter, he says, I'm going to go fishing. And in verse 2 we read of John 21 that Simon Peter, Thomas called the twin, Nathaniel of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 others were together. And they said, we'll go with you. And they went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Now Philip's not mentioned there, but Nathaniel's mentioned there. And Philip was always hanging out with Andrew or Nathaniel. And so 2 others are mentioned who aren't named, and we just assume that one of those has to be Philip, because Nathaniel and Andrew are there. And so there's 7 here who all seem to be fishermen. And maybe they got into it, maybe we're reading too much into it, but the fact that he knew Peter and Andrew, there were some from the same village, this is a fishing village, probably indicates that Philip knew these guys for a long time. Maybe all 7 of these you read about in John 21, verse 2. Maybe they grew up together. And I just really think it's interesting how Jesus chose his disciples. Because, corporations don't hire their teams that way, right? They get headhunters who go out and look for the best and the brightest in the industry. And we're gonna get the smartest people that we can draw in. If we have to fly them in from Canada or from Europe, we'll bring them in because we want the best. And Jesus from Nazareth, just goes to a village nearby, finds a group of friends that have grown up together that have no religious training, and they're not rabbis. They didn't grow up around Jerusalem. They didn't get good educations. They were fishermen, and he called them to follow him. And then he added a tax collector and a zealot and others that just go against the grain of what the world would demand in terms of qualifications for this kind of thing. And he changed the world with these guys. Andrew seems to be important to Philip. They're from the same hometown, and in a lot of the stories we'll talk about tonight, Andrew's with Philip. And then there's Nathaniel as well. Let's look at him. He's mentioned also. Philip's often paired with him. He's often listed right next to Philip in the list that we read of the apostles. And we're introduced to Nathaniel through Philip. If you'll look at John 1, verse 43. The next day, Jesus decided to go to Galilee. And he found Philip and said to him, "Follow me." And then there's that little biographical note in verse 44 that Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter. But we're talking about Nathanael now. So look at verse 45. Philip found Nathanael and said to him, "We have found him of whom Moses in the law and also the prophets wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph." Now, does that seem a little wordy to you? What you're getting here is a wonderful glimpse into Philip's personality. Compare it with Andrew, who did the same thing with his brother Peter. Back up a few verses to John chapter 1, verse 41. How did Andrew call Peter to come find Christ? We have found the Messiah. He didn't have to go into all these details. Philip is kind of analytical, detail-oriented, a little bit of a by-the-book kind of guy. Look at this again. We have found him of whom Moses in the law and also the prophets wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph. We get all of this fulfillment of prophecy, not just the law, but also the prophets. Now let's go into a biography of Jesus. I used to work with a preacher who would tell people sometimes, "Give me the Reader's Digest version." Well, maybe Nathaniel would have said that to him. How about shortening this down a little bit and getting to your point? But I think this is a good glimpse into Philip's personality. He was a very detail-oriented, analytical sort of person. And I wouldn't say that he's unintelligent. Now, some of the commentaries I've read, some of the people who wrote books about the apostles I've been reading, interpret him this way. Herbert Lockyer wrote this book called All the Apostles of the Bible. And he calls Philip slow-witted. Now, maybe it's because compared to Nathaniel, everybody is slow-witted. Just compare these two guys. Nathaniel, he tries to engage Philip in debate. Can anything, this is verse 46, can anything good come out of Nazareth? So he's starting to get into this conversation, and Nathaniel's sharp. He seems to be a debater. And how did Philip respond? I'm not going to argue with you about this. Come and see. Come and see. And so Nathaniel, he goes on, and I've been on Nathaniel so much because I'm going to be gone next week. I'm not going to get to talk about him. It's killing me because he's one of my favorites. But when Jesus comes to Nathaniel, an Israelite indeed, in whom there is no guile, how do you know me? Nathaniel said. And Jesus said, before Philip called you, when you were under the fig tree, I saw you. Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel. Quick, decisive, sharp, sometimes argumentative, but not when the facts are there. That's Nathaniel. And Philip, well, you'll see he sometimes can't make up his mind. I got to have all the facts. I've got to stack them up. I'm going to analyze them. I'm going to scratch my head for a long time. I'm going to draw this out. That was Philip's personality. I don't think he was unintelligent. I think he was highly intelligent, and that may have been his problem. He was very by the book. He was a rule follower, you might say. And Jesus paired him up with Nathaniel. They went out 2 by 2, according to Mark 6, verse 7. And I just assume, and maybe I shouldn't assume this, but I just assumed that he went out with Nathaniel, because together they complemented one another. Philip had some really good friends around him. I mean, who wouldn't love to have Peter and Andrew with you? But in addition to that, he had Nathaniel. And that's part of what made him great and what maybe landed him in this elite list of Jesus' 12 apostles. So we talked about his friends. Let's talk about his Savior. Let's look at this for a moment. I was talking about the way people designate Philip. Herbert Lockyer called him the slow-witted apostle. I don't think that's fair. John MacArthur's description, I think, is better, the bean counter, because he was, you'll see when we get to the feeding of the 5,000, he's counting beans, trying to analyze and do the math on whether we can come up with enough food to feed 10,000 or more people. But I think a good description that's true to him is to call him the first found by Jesus. Go back to John chapter 1, verse 43. Jesus found Philip and said to him, "Follow me." Now this is the first time, the first apostle that Jesus found. Now it's not the first one he called, but if you go back to the others, to Peter and Andrew, for example, in the passage before, John is included in that. He doesn't name himself, but he was one of the ones. He was standing there with Andrew by John the Baptist, and John the Baptist pointed to Jesus and said, "Behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world." And they went to him, they found him. And then Andrew runs home and he gets Peter, and so Andrew found Jesus and then found Peter, and then Peter found Jesus. But Jesus just goes to Philip, and Jesus finds Philip and says, "Follow me." This is the first apostle Jesus found, who searched for, he searched for him to call him to himself.
I think it's expressive that Philip didn't have to have all this big explanation about Christ. Christ come to him, Philip was there.
Yeah, he seems very trusting.
He didn't have to be given this long list of facts to prove it.
Mm-hmm.
Follow Christ immediately.
Yeah, he appears to have this very humble, childlike reaction to Jesus calling him. And Jim, that may have something to do with verse 45, because we see that the seeking was mutual. Because verse 45 tells us, Philip found Nathanael and said to him, "We have found him of whom Moses in the law and the prophets wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph." And so it would be wrong to say that Philip had never thought about the Messiah or the Christ or read the Old Testament scriptures or expected him to come. And then Jesus just blows him away out of nowhere, and Jesus found him. The seeking was mutual. Jesus was seeking Philip, and Philip, he was seeking Jesus as well. And I suppose Jesus knew that, but he knew him when he saw him. He knew that this was him. And that just gives me an opportunity to bring up something that we don't talk about enough, and that's that the law of seeking and finding in the Bible is so certain. It's almost as if it were natural law, like the laws of gravity or the laws of sowing and reaping. Seeking and finding, the way it's expressed in Scripture, is just as certain. And I'll just give you two examples, one from the Old Testament, one from the New Testament. Here's Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 29. "But from there you will seek the Lord your God, and you will find him, if you search after him with all your heart and with all your soul." You see how certain Moses is? If you search after him with all your heart and soul, you will find Him. There's no doubt there. The other one you could probably guess from the New Testament. It's in the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew 7:7-8. Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and it will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, and the one who seeks finds, and to the one who knocks it will be opened. And all these examples come to mind. Cornelius, Acts chapter 10. He's giving alms to the poor. He's a Gentile. He's praying to the Lord. And he's seeking. And he finds the truth through Peter. And Philip was seeking too. And that's why Jesus found him. I don't know about you, but I get a lot of comfort from the law of seeking and finding. Because I know there are a lot of good hearts out there, good soil out there that need Jesus and want Him. And they're searching. And I put my faith in this law that God is using us to find them, to help them find Christ. And there are a lot of answers I'm searching for personally in my growth as a Christian. And I know you're the same way, and I may be searching for different answers than you are, but we're all searching and all wondering, and we know that, the secret things belong to God. I'm not talking about, curiosity questions and things like that. I'm talking about, how do I cope with this? How do I grow through this? How am I going to do this? And Lord, lead me through this. And Jesus is saying, ask, seek. Don't forget, He says, knock. And in both of those passages from the Old Testament and the New Testament, it's not just like, well, when I get the time, I'll look around. Like you lost a pen or something, oh yeah, that pen. Maybe it's under the couch. Not that kind of seeking, but diligent. Moses says, if you seek Him with all your heart and with all your soul. It's that kind of seeking. Diligence. I know that many of you have stories about how you came to Christ because you were seeking, and you can't really explain how the circumstances added up to your finding what you were searching for. It's the promises of God. And we see it at work in Philip's life. Here is a search that never fails. If we search for Christ, He's already looking. We will be found. One last thing here, and I'm glad we have plenty of time because this is the biggest part. Unfortunately, hopefully when we get to the end of our lives, if somebody does a lesson about us, the longest part of it's not going to be our shortcomings, but we share a lot of Philip's shortcomings, so I don't think we're talking ugly about him in any way. But there are 3 examples, 3 stories in the book of John about Philip's shortcomings, and we're going to look at them one by one. The first one's very familiar, the feeding of the 5,000. And that's in John chapter 6. Let's turn over there. And I'm going to start reading at about verse 5, and we'll work through this. Lifting up His eyes then, and seeing that a large crowd was coming towards Him, Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread so that these people may eat?" Why did He ask Philip? There were 12 guys He could have picked on. Some have supposed that Philip may have been regarded as the administrator of the group. It certainly fit his personality. And we know John points out in another passage that Judas Iscariot was in charge of the money bag and that he was also a thief. John tells us that about Judas, so maybe they had divvied up responsibilities and Philip was the one that you would ask these kinds of questions. But look at the next verse. John tells us here that he said this to test him. I think King James says to prove him. To test him, for he himself knew what he would do. Every time Jesus asks a question, he's not trying to get information. He's not trying to get advice. He already knows. He was testing Philip. And it may be that Philip was the administrator, but it may have been that Philip needed a test. He needed a lesson. He needed to be weighed and found wanting, which is what's about to happen. Here comes the bean counter. Verse 7. Philip answered him, 200 denarii would not buy enough bread for each of them to get a little. And we know there were 5,000 men, not counting the women and children. May have been 12, 15,000 people out there, so we sympathize with Philip. But what do you think Philip should have said here? Okay, this was the wrong answer, right? 200 denarii is 200 days' wages. That, 15,000 people, a meal. He's calculating everything up. He's right. From a worldly point of view, that's not enough. But this is John chapter 6. Okay, in John chapter 2, Jesus is at a wedding. They run out of wine. He has them fill up 6 water pots full of water, and it turns into the best quality wine the master of ceremonies had ever tasted. Philip saw that. He knew about that. He had seen healings and all kinds of things. What should he have said instead of this? Let's do it. He should have said, Lord, I don't know, but I know that you know. Do your thing. Or what did Jesus' mother say at the wedding feast? Yeah, I love that because Jesus told her, he's like, my hour's not yet come. She says, do whatever he tells you to do. She just walks off. And that's a great, if you're not a parent yet, all parents know, you don't argue with your kids, right? You tell them and then you walk away before they start arguing, especially when they get in their teen years. You just pick up your room and then you just walk off. And you just pray that they really pick their room up. And they usually do. So he should have said, Lord, I don't know, or said something like Mary did. But instead, he does the math. He does the arithmetic. He starts counting beans. And he says, Lord, it's impossible. And what has Jesus been trying to teach them? About possibilities, about faith. Oh, you of little faith. Matthew 17:20, if you say to this mountain, move from here to there, it will be done for you. He's been teaching them these things. And this was the test. Have you been listening, Philip? You could have called Philip, and if I thought about it, I might have given him this name, the deaf apostle, because he seemed hard of hearing. And he hadn't been listening to Jesus on this either. Well, Andrew's in the story. Simon Peter's brother. Verse 9, there's a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. What are they for so many? And Jesus had them sit down, and they sit down, 5,000 of them, and he takes the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also the fish, as many as they wanted. And when they had eaten their fill, he told the disciples, gather up the leftover fragments that nothing may be lost. So they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with fragments from the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten. And then people said, this is indeed the prophet who is come into the world. That's the first shortcoming. Yeah, go ahead. Well, he found the boy. I mean, he brought something. What are these? Yeah, what are these? That's true. Yeah. Yeah. Is that what you were going to say? All right. Anybody else want to dump on Andrew?
Well, you know those Andrew people.
Yeah. Don't pick on Andrew. That's right. All right. Let's go to the second example. This is John chapter 12. John 12. No way. This is a shorter account. Philip's name is Greek. It means lover of horses. One of the Greek words for love is philia. It has to do with the affectionate love. And Philip means lover of horses. He had a Jewish name, we assume, but we don't have it. He's just called by his Greek name. And this may be why certain Greeks came to him. And again, it may also have to do with maybe he was team manager or something. But Greeks come to him asking to see Jesus. Verse 20. Among those who went up to worship at the feast were some Greeks. So these came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida in Galilee, and asked him, Sir, we wish to see Jesus. What did Philip do? He went and told Andrew. Andrew and Philip went and told Jesus. He didn't know what to do. He was analyzing and trying to find the rule about this. And he might have remembered that when Jesus sent them on the limited commission, he said, go only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And he thought, well, that's the rule on Gentiles. But here's a group of people in Jesus' last week who want to see Jesus. Andrew knew what to do. He went and got Jesus. We can at least say this. Philip knew who to go to when he didn't know what to do. Let's go to John 14. This is after they've gotten up from the Last Supper, the night of Jesus' arrest. He's preparing his disciples. This is the last teaching opportunity, aside from the 40 days between his resurrection and ascension, the last teaching opportunity before the cross that he'll have with them. Time is short. He's preparing them. Do not let your heart be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me. And then Thomas says, verse 5, Lord, we do not know where you're going. How can we know the way? And that's when Jesus gives one of those great I am statements. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you had known me, he said, you would have known my Father also. From now on, you do know him and have seen him. Now, you know what Jesus means by that, right? And you haven't been living with him for 3 years. Look what happens next. Verse 8. Philip said, Lord, show us the Father, and it is enough for us. And Jesus' human side comes out. He's not sinning here, but he seems a little frustrated. Verse 9. Have I been with you so long, and you still do not know me, Philip? Whoever has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, show us the Father? That's the clearest example of Jesus saying, I am God, that I can find. But he's been telling this to Philip for almost 3 years. He just said it in verses 6 and 7. And Philip, he's been daydreaming or thinking about how he's going to buy dinner for the group or doing something else about rules or details, analyzing the events, and he does what a lot of us do. Well, I'm not sure if I got the instructions right. Very detail-oriented. Jesus, I'm not really sure. I heard him say, from now on, you know him and you've seen him. But I missed that part. I missed that day. I was sick that lesson. Show us the Father. Give it to me one more time. And that's a sign of small faith. Have you ever read something in the Bible and you understood it and you knew it and you remembered it? And then you're confronted with something and you think, I really want to do this. Let me go back and see if I can make the Bible say that I can do this. And you go back and it doesn't say that. Just give it to me one more time. You ask a friend or a church leader or a preacher or a teacher or an elder or somebody, tell me one more time what's right about this and why I shouldn't do this and why this is wrong. Or, maybe I could just, if we just think about this, this is something you'll find. We heard somebody say this at Freed Arm Lectureships last week. Have you ever noticed that every time an eldership goes back to restudy an issue, the result is always that they had always been wrong in the past about the issue? They never restudy an issue and find out, oh yeah, we were right on that. Philip was going back and restudying it again. And Jesus put it as plain as he could for Philip. And you notice the tenderness in the way that he called his name. If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. And Philip learned that. Tradition says that Philip and Nathaniel and Philip's sister Mariamne went to Phrygia, where Colossae, Laodicea, and Hierapolis, the Tri-City area in Asia Minor, were located. And in Hierapolis, Philip died for his faith, and they hanged him on a pillar, and he died in a horrible tragedy, but glorifying God with his death, because he finally learned that he had seen the Father, and it was enough for him. That's Philip. Next week, Nathaniel.